Alrighty. Well, hello and welcome to Rebilly's first webinar panel. For those of you that don't know, Rebilly is a leading payment orchestration platform, and we're here today with some industry experts to discuss strong customer authentication, 3DS2, 3D Secure 2, and the upcoming implementation deadline. The goals of this webinar are to help merchants better understand what to expect with 3DS2, how to prepare for this implementation, and some predictive insights on what's likely to happen after the deadline. My name is Emily and I'm Rebilly's Customer Success Manager and host of this roundtable. I'd like to invite the panelists joining me today to introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam Altman. I'm the CEO and founder of Rebilly. I've been, you may be wondering what's my expertise related to cards. I've been a card holder for 25 years. I've been a merchant in various capacities for 20 years. And I've been the founder and CEO of Rebilly for 8 years.
Nice. Thanks, Adam. We'll go ahead and move to Casper.
My name is Casper Ingber. I'm a DevOps engineer and a tech lead at 3dsecure.io. We run a 3D Secure server, sort of an essential part of the 3D Secure operating environment. And I'm a card holder, not for 25 years, but you know, for a while. And as you may have noticed, my accent will vary because I'm from Denmark, and yeah, so I apologize in advance.
Thank you, Casper. All right, and Irina.
Hey everyone, my name is Irina. I'm Irina Angelova. I'm a software engineer here at Rebilly. I have a lot of experience in e-commerce and fintech. I'm currently in charge of the FramePay project in Rebilly, which takes care of all 3DS 2 related details for our customers. And I'm very happy to be here today.
Thanks so much, Irina. All right, so strong customer authentication, payment security, and 3DS2 are all hot topics right now. And I know I personally really want to understand more about these topics. As I'm working with merchants, they're all concerned about this upcoming deadline. They have a lot of questions. They're trying to understand it too. So let's dive into some questions. The first question is just kind of a general question to the group. I'd like to understand, before 3DS, how were merchants handling customer authentication and fighting fraud? Like, what was kind of the baseline before these regulations are rolling out?
I'll start. So before 3DS2, there was 3DS1. And 3DS1's been around for 19 years. 3DS1 allows you to shift liability to the issuer. So you've got the card holder who gets a card that's issued from the issuer or the issuing bank, and the issuer is ultimately the one that's going to take that liability. If the card holder says, "Oh, I didn't do this transaction," it normally would fall back to the acquirer, who then pushes it to the merchant. So in this case, it's the issuer that accepts that liability. If there's a successful authentication. But other than that, there are other tools that people use to fight fraud, including the address verification service and card verification value. And typically out of payment processing, there's risk factors for risk scoring to manage block and allow lists. So those are the tools that people typically use to fight fraud today.
Got it.
So historically, 3D Secure 1 came up after they found that that the CSC on the back of your card is not if sufficient to protect cardholders from cardholder fraud, right? So 3D Secure 1, which was started by Visa, essentially came up because they needed some way to authenticate that the cardholder was involved in transactions and purchases, and that's the result. And there's some legal questions out there that I'm going to stay out of, but whether or not 3D Secure version 1 is SCA compliant. I know the Danish Financial Authority has said that it's not compliant, so 3D Secure version 2 is essentially the future. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you both. So that leads to my second question, which is, what is two-factor authentication and how does it verify that a payment card is genuine?
So I can take this question. Historically, how people authenticate their identity would be with a password. So this is how we verify that a person is who they are, because they know something unique. So for example, a card holder would have a password or a PIN, and only they know it. So that's how we verify it's them. However, this has proven to be not enough nowadays. And since we have to remember many passwords, many people reuse their password, which makes it very easy to crack them, and it's a very big security liability. So nowadays we employ other methods to verify the identity, such as checking for something that they have, for example, their device, something that they are, like a biometric scan of maybe their fingerprint or their retina or their facial, their face with facial recognition. And that's how we verify that a person is who they are with two-factor authentication. It's usually with push notification and the password.
Got it. Thank you. Adam, you touched a little bit on this, but I'd really like to understand what's the difference between 3DS1 and 3DS2?
Great.
And maybe, this is a question for anybody, Casper, Adam, anybody that can take this one.
Well, as a user, as a card holder, I can say the difference that it will depend on your issuing bank. And, at Rebilly, we're always looking at the end customer payment experience. Mm-hmm. So as a card holder, one thing that you may see is you may not see anything because there's this new frictionless flow in 3DS2. The challenge flow seems more similar to 3DS1 from my perspective when I'm looking at what's the difference between 3DS1 and 2. I see 3DS1, I'm always interrupted. 3DS2, I'm not. So, but then again, issuer support is going to vary, and it's going to vary over time. So as we approach the deadline, as we go beyond it, in the US, it's been 19 years since 3DS1 has come out, and issuers don't have very good support for it. So I bank at Chase, and Chase is I believe still the largest issuer of cards in the world, and they don't have very good 3DS1 support from a cardholder's perspective. As a payment processor, yes, they support it all. But as a cardholder, I never get to experience a challenge. And the merchant who I'm buying from never gets to experience a full liability shift to my bank.
So just to continue on that, so I see to me, there are three major differences. First is organizational. So 3D Secure 1 was, as I mentioned, started by Visa and another company that I'm not sure of, and then adopted by other card schemes. 3D Secure 2 was developed by EMD Co., which is a collaboration between essentially all major card schemes. And this sort of gives it a foundation, and it's widespread. I mean, the implementation is the same, essentially, that you have to do everywhere with minor differences. And this also means that, from my experience, card schemes, specifically for me, Visa and MasterCard, because those are the card schemes we acquire, that's a different story, have actually mandated deadlines for issuer support and proper issuer support, and have set out metrics that issuers are supposed to live up to, so they don't have bad cardholder experiences using 3D Secure. So that's the organizational and the seriousness question. Then there's the technical side. The technical side is that it's a slightly more modern protocol, but the real change is the amount of data that is collected, such that your bank can make sure that it's really you that's actually making the purchase. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, as a card holder, I think I've only seen the challenge flow, or I guess it would be the 3D Secure 1 flow once in my life, where I was, and I remember being totally confused by it. I was like, why am I getting redirected to my bank right now? This is really strange. So that's my own personal experience with that. As kind of, oh, go ahead.
As Adam mentioned, it's for acquirers, who are usually the ones responsible for paying if there's a, what's it called?
Chargeback.
Yeah, exactly. So acquirers are usually responsible for handling chargeback fees, right? And liability shift, which 3D Secure version 1 and 3D Secure version 2 gives, moves that to the issuer side, as you mentioned. And so acquirers have been some of the big, some of the people who have actually wanted to see 3D Secure adopted, right? And I know that 3D Secure is much more widely used in Europe than in the US, because I'm not sure why, I have to be honest. So I'm not surprised that the US, that you haven't seen it that many times.
Cool. That leads to kind of a follow-up question on Adam's answer. How does an issuer decide with 3DS2 how to issue the challenge flow versus the frictionless flow?
So I can take this. So the challenge flow is essentially the same as 3D Secure version 1, as Adam mentioned. The frictionless flow can be based on transactional risk analysis, right? So the 3D Secure version 2 requires a lot of extra data about the cardholder. We're talking about email, cardholder name, and stuff like that, which is, this makes the issuer, the bank, the bank then has much more information to work with when they have to actually decide if the cardholder is actually involved in the transaction. Yeah, and this is a major difference from 3D Secure version 1, where we found that most of the time this data is not included because it's actually not required by 3D Secure version 1, essentially.
Got it. And I'm curious, like, how much of the information that they're gathering is provided by the customer versus like some more sort of passive data collection, like from your browser or things like that?
So for the browser, there are some things like the browser accept header. Now we're getting into technical terms, and I apologize. So these are included. These are not necessarily, how should we say, cardholder specific, right? So they could be the same on two different computers. But you know, if they're close enough, then it might be a good match to, along with other data, to actually match the cardholder, to actually ensure that the cardholder is present, right? Along with the browser accept header, there's something called the 3DS method. I did not come up with that naming, so I'm going to apologize for it. I'm not going to apologize for it, but it's a way to let the issuer, the ACS, who's acting on behalf of the issuer, actually talk to your browser to verify that maybe that you've actually purchased stuff from the using the same browser before. So that's possible. So I'd say there are some issues with it, but in general, it's pretty safe. Sorry, what was I going to say? There's a lot of good information for issuers and the ACS to act on to ensure that the cardholder is present.
Cool, thank you. Oh, Adam?
Yeah, just as a follow-up on that, from some of the early adopters we have using it, we see really variable amount based on the issuer of how often they use the frictionless flow versus the challenge flow. Some issuers seem to still tend towards the challenge flow, while others seem to have really embraced the frictionless flow. Is that something you're seeing across the rest of your portfolio?
Most definitely. So specifically for the wider Europe and for outside Europe. For outside Europe, we see a much larger percentage of frictionless transactions. Mm-hmm. And that is related likely to PSD2, which is a new European regulative that really comes into full force on the 1st of January in a couple of months. Right? Because this requires what's called strong customer authentication, which I guess we will get into that later. So frictionless and strong customer authentication are not necessarily in tune. So frictionless does not necessarily give strong customer authentication, depending on the issuer, right? And I'm sorry, Adam, your question was, I sidetracked myself.
Yeah, I was just remarking on how different.
Yeah, how different issuers handle it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for local Danish issuers and Swedish issuers, we've seen that. Well, let's start with Danish issuers. They almost universally use challenge flows, even when they could be doing frictionless flows. Mm-hmm. And that is because of local technical reasons. I mean, Denmark is a small country, so the banks have sort of come together and decided that everyone needs to do challenge flows until the setup has evolved. Because essentially all issuers in Denmark use one of three implementations to handle card flows. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're seeing, so across our portfolio, my best guess is we're seeing 70% frictionless these days.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you. That leads to my next question, which is, what are the major challenges of 3DS2 implementation?
Well, I can, yeah, Adam, you go ahead.
I'd like to think that Rebilly helps at least our clients manage that seamlessly, because thanks to Irina and her team, we have integrated all of the metadata that we need to capture into our FramePay, which our clients can use on their websites, or we use it ourselves within our own hosted payment forms. So that really helps with the extra data capture that's required for 3DS2. From our perspective, the rest of the flow is pretty similar. So we think it won't require our clients to make a major shift unless they haven't implemented our FramePay or using our hosted payment forms yet.
And I'd agree with Adam. The main problem here for merchants and for payment service providers is the extra data that needs to be collected. Right? The technical differences aren't that big from 3D Secure version 1, and sort of having a nice payment window that actually handles this and helps merchants integrating is a really good thing to have, because it simplifies a lot.
Perfect.
One challenge that we have seen is that, and Casper, please correct me where I go wrong here,
Sure.
is that with the Visa, the merchant is automatically enrolled for 3DS2. With MasterCard, they are not, and their acquirer needs to enroll them, and if they don't, MasterCard will not
they will
accept
flat
it.
out,
Yeah,
Oh.
and then it ends up being downgraded to 3DS1 type of transaction.
That is absolutely correct. So Visa and MasterCard have decided to implement this differently, and let's not get into other card schemes because I can keep going for days. But MasterCard requires that the acquirer enrolls into 3D Secure version 2, and in fact into 3D Secure version 1 separately from version 2, right? And this, of course, needs to be done by the acquirer. So when talking about difficulties, I mentioned difficulties on the merchant side, because the merchant side really only needs to be concerned with the data collection. The rest should likely be handled by upstream DSPs and acquirers and 3D Secure servers. There are some technical issues with how the card schemes decide to implement stuff like this, and how they need to write documentation. Right? So I think much of 3DS version 2 was spawned by the European PSD2 legislation, which actually it should have come into force 15th September last year, but it's from 1st of January next year, and this sort of required a shift in how serious card schemes would have to take 3D Secure because of the strong customer authentication requirement.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I also wanted to just continue and say that the PSD2 regulation is not aimed at merchants per se. It's more aimed towards card issuers and banks. So merchants who want to wait and see will have some financial repercussions, because after January 1st, all non-3DS2 transactions will be just rejected. They will not go through. So there will be a loss in transaction volume, and yeah. So technically, everyone has to use 3DS2.
That's a good segue. So we've talked about the deadline for migrating to 3DS2. Does this apply worldwide?
As far as I know, there is no mandate in North America for this. It's only for Europe that by law, all issuers and all banks are required to use 3DS and strong customer authentication. But there are a lot of benefits to 3DS2 that are not geographically limited. So there will be benefits for everyone who decides to migrate to 3DS2. 3DS2, as far as I know, is optimized for all e-commerce devices, including mobile devices, iPads, iPhone, like phones and everything. And there's also going to be improved security. So the customer experience is, this is a very big plus for merchants and for improving the customer experience.
3D Secure version 1. I haven't recently seen any sunset for the protocol. As far as I remember, October 2021 would be sort of a deadline for when people should have migrated to 3D Secure version 2, right? So going back, I wouldn't confidently say that 3D Secure version 1 transactions are going to be rejected, but it's going to be a process, and people are going to have to move to 3D Secure version 2. But people are, of course, trying not to interrupt the payment flows because they know how important it is. So in Europe, from the January 1st, 2021, MasterCard will start issuing fees if their acquirers have more than 30% 3D Secure version 1 transactions. They will issue a fee per acquirer, and that fee will grow and keep growing until October 2021. So there's a motivation to move to 3D Secure version 2, and I agree it gives it improves the security, and it should improve, definitely should improve the cardholder experience because of the frictionless flow, which is essential. And of course, you have mobile support built into the protocol.
Are there some exceptions or exclusions where certain transactions can be excluded from 3D Secure 2?
So the PSD2 standard. Now I'm talking about PSD2. Sorry, I guess this is what you're asking about.
Yes.
So the PSD2 standard has several exemptions. First off, subsequent recurring transactions are exempt from 3D Secure. And if you have a low value payment below 30 euros, this is also exempt from 3D Secure. I'm going to add the caveat here that if you've made more than 5 purchases or in less than 5 purchases purchased for more than 100 euros, you still have to do 3D Secure, but that's an annoying technical thing that the issuer has to handle, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So following up on that question, how exactly does the exemption process work for 3DS2 for recurring transactions?
So the exemption process for recurring transactions, it's simply you don't have to call 3D Secure version 2. So let me think for a second. Essentially, so it's sort of complex because we were talking about liability shift earlier, and both Visa and MasterCard offer a way to actually gain liability shift on subsequent recurring transactions or installments by actually doing a 3DS requester initiated authentication, right, where the cardholder is not involved to gain liability shift on the subsequent recurring transactions. So, but without involving the cardholder.
Got it.
And so that one, it's not a requirement of PSD2, but it's an option, an extra benefit that merchants could get if they use that. Yes.
Correct. Yeah. So some of this is I get the sense that it's being fleshed out by card schemes right now. So they're updating their authentication guides. The last update was during the summer, I believe, and they're continuously working on finding ways to improve this in the future. So these improvements would likely primarily be for the acquirers to expose, like to PSPs and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. I have another question. What is the risk engine in 3DS2?
So I'm not certain what the risk engine is in 3D Secure version 2. I have to be honest, because I've probably come across the term, but I read a lot of terms these days. So, but I would imagine, do you want a definite answer, or should I just talk about what a risk engine could be?
I'd be curious just to hear what it could be.
So the risk engine would be something that the ACS on behalf of the issuer would use to ensure that the cardholder was included in the authentication. That the cardholder originated the authentication. This could be many things. So we have the 3DS method, which can be used to collect data from the cardholder's browser. We have device fingerprinting on mobile, phones, which is also meant to, to fingerprint the cardholder's device. Yes. And then there's the additional information that's sent in the authentication call, and and then there's challenge on top. So the challenge only happens if the risk engine decides that we can't ensure that the cardholder is involved. And the risk engine would simply be the engine making that decision. Modern engines, I would assume, would use essentially maybe a decision tree. If you're maybe at a larger issuer, I'm not going to name names here because then you could use some simple machine learning to make those decisions. I know for a fact that some issuers have decided to just cap it at a certain amount. So they've seen that transactions under X amount rarely has any fraud because it doesn't pay off for fraudsters to use low amounts. So they just set a straight up thing where if you're under that amount, no challenge, and if you're above, then you'll get a challenge.
I have another maybe somewhat related question, which is, I'll just put it this way, a tale of two merchants. One merchant comes and says, hey, you know what, when we're using 3DS2 and there's no friction, let's say it's frictionless, we notice that our approval rate goes up. And that's because they are hypothesizing that the issuer is more confident in that the transaction is authentic. I've got then the other merchant, it takes the opposite standpoint, which says, hey, when we do the same transaction and it's frictionless, so it's no end user difference to the end user, the issuer is deciding to reject it more often because they have to accept the liability for it. So they're scrutinizing it more closely. Are different issuers, is it possible that they're both right and different issuers are taking different stances on this, on those transactions?
I'm 100% sure that different issuers are handling it differently. Let me think for a second. So if you have a decent risk engine, you would be inclined to trust the frictionless authentications, right? Yeah. And as I mentioned, some issuers, I'm not going to name names, don't have a decent risk engine. So so they simply choose not to trust the frictionless flows, right? And again, we live in a world where we have card schemes that sort of regulate how issuers behave and how they don't behave. And we live in a world where issuers vary wildly in their competence. I'm not sure if we're gonna put this out, but issuers don't agree on essentially anything, right? So it's entirely possible that they decide either which way.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you. I think our audience would appreciate this as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Do you, in your crystal ball predictions, do you see things converging more towards some level of consistency in the industry, or do you expect these discrepancies to continue in the way that different issuers handle authentication? Do you expect to see this continue for like the foreseeable future, or do you expect any sort of?
So I can answer that on a I was going to say legislative level, but we have seen indications from card schemes that they will impose mandates on issuers that if they do have actually give frictionless authentication. If they do have a frictionless 3D Secure 2 flow, they actually mandate that at least, I believe, something like 90% of them actually should result in successful transactions and successful authorizations. Right? Because I think the card schemes are aware that this is a problem with their issuers. So, I believe it's going to get better in the future. Cool. We've talked with, of course, our local partners from Visa and MasterCard in Denmark and in Europe, and they're aware of the problems. And it's in their interest to streamline this as much as possible, so that essentially the cardholder is the card scheme's business, right? So mm-hmm. They want to improve the cardholder's experience for this, and this comes as you've said and as you've acknowledged. 3D Secure version 2 is 3D Secure in general is something rather new in many parts of the world. In the US, where it's going to happen, right? So to make this the transition as seamless as possible, they've tried to streamline the process as much as possible with the card schemes. So the gist would be it's likely going to get better.
Cool, thank you. Moving to my next question, what should merchants be doing right now to prepare for the January 1 deadline?
Adam, do you want to start this one?
Sure. So I think merchants, they can expect increase in declines if they do nothing. So especially for the cardholders they're serving that are in Europe and the UK, I think they should start preparing for it today. So it's time to enable 3DS2. The deadline has already been extended, and it's likely that it won't be extended further. I think in general, if they're using our FramePay solution or our hosted payment forms, there's not much integration work they need to do, but they do need to enable it and have their acquirer enroll them for MasterCard specifically. So they want to be sure to get that done and that process done. We will have or we already have a documentation page, which leads you through how to configure it on any gateway account that you have in Rebilly. If you are interested in splitting traffic to test this, let's say you're a skeptical merchant and you don't think that you're going to expect declines, you can use our rules engine to split that and test that. Or if you want to split out just specifically European issued cards, you can do that and present 3DS2 to those experiences. From my perspective, I think it's worthwhile looking and reviewing it worldwide, and then making, for several reasons, as we mentioned earlier, the frictionless flow is much more common outside of Europe right now. So you're going to have very high percentage of cardholders that never get redirected anywhere because the bank can make a decision based off of the additional information that we're sending. And two, if you do notice, and we have reports that can help you notice, that an issuer is being hostile to 3DS2, then you can make an exclusion and say, you know what, for this specific issuer that's located in that country, probably non-European country, we need to make an exclusion, and you can exclude them from 3DS2. So I really recommend rolling it out across the board and then making exclusions as needed. But over time, these exclusions probably won't be necessary as issuers eventually adopt better risk engines and get pressured by the card schemes to properly support support 3DS2. It's just a case that a merchant's probably not likely to make successfully, but if there's enough data that indicates an issuer is truly mishandling it, I think we could pass that through to the appropriate scheme so that the scheme becomes aware and can help the issuer correct the problems in that area.
Yeah. So, and I continue that. So the first thing is merchants should probably start taking this serious. They should talk to their gateways or PSPs, however you refer to them, to make sure that this can actually be done, strongly preferably before January 1st. Well, before Christmas, let's put it like that. And my main takeaway for this for merchants would be that this can be a bit tricky to get right. At some point, you need an integration and you need to test it and you need to get it live. Software development is difficult sometimes, as Arena can probably verify, and things can take quite a while to sort of evolve into something you can put into production. So be aware and take action.
I have a follow-up question on that one. Irina, this one's probably a good one for you. From a developer standpoint, did you experience any challenges implementing this in our FramePay solution?
Not at all. The main thing was that we created a new library which collects risk data from the browser of the end user. It's actually an open source library. It's called Risk Data Collector, and that's what we use to collect information from the browser. As Casper said before, we sent information such as a fingerprint of the browser, and other identifying information for the system, like the resolution of the screen and width, height, and so on of the viewport. We collect that information, we pass it on. It was quite straightforward. We didn't face a lot of trouble. And the best thing is that for our merchants who are using this solution, it's going to be completely out of the box. They don't have to do anything.
Nice.
And they still reap all the benefits.
And they get the benefits of our early adopters. For example, we found together with Casper, we found a bug in a major, well, I won't name it, but a major scheme-backed provider of scheme-owned provider, and they're not super fast at fixing bugs. So it took quarters for the bug, with an S on the end of that, for the bug to be fixed and rolled out. So you get to benefit from our early adopters who paid the price, but of finding those bugs. But it seems like things are working really smoothly right now for them.
Yeah, I was in contact with the card scheme and the ACS on this end, and it's we were talking quarters. Yes, the fix is still not in, as far as I'm aware. So it's pretty incredible. But card schemes and issuers are slow. That's also why we've had the extension. And I know for a fact that that issuers across Europe have been hoping for another extension of PSD2, which, as mentioned, is to come into effect the 1st of January. This I have also heard is not going to happen. Well, I'm not, I can't foresee the future, but I've heard from sources that they're not expecting it to be extended again.
On the merchant side, your acquirer needs to enroll you for the MasterCard 3DS 2. And acquirers are going to vary in their experience of doing that. 3DS 2 is relatively new. So if you work with an acquirer who's never done that before, it can take time for them to figure out how to do that. So be prepared, depending on your acquirer's experience, which they should gain over time as this becomes a requirement, that your acquirer is another another point in this process that you need to work through to do the enrollment. I think in terms of the actual work involved, it's relatively minimal, but knowing how to do the work and knowing who at the acquirer does the work is something that they might still be working out depending on your acquirer.
You can tell the acquirer that they have to go into MasterCard Connect and buy the ISSM tool, and that's where they can upload merchant information. Merchant information has to be backfilled as well for 3D Secure version 2.
Got it. Looks like we're getting a little bit close to time. I want to make sure that we're asking all the right questions. Does anybody else have a question for the group?
How has your experience been with the 3D Secure server market? Now, we operate 3dsecure.io, of course, and we operate an MPI, a 3D Secure version 1 server equivalent. What's the market for 3D Secure servers?
It's a good question. I'm familiar with a handful of them. So in my experience, it's quite different from payment gateways where there might be dozens or hundreds of them. There seems to be a fewer number of 3D Secure servers. We've evaluated a handful of them, and we selected you as our primary provider based on a few factors. One is the clarity of your API and the transparency of it. So other providers might say, oh, here's a JavaScript that you need to run on the browser, and that's what they tell you, and they don't give you another alternative to collect. Like, we built our risk data collector to build it, and it's not really transparent what that is doing. And we're uncomfortable with that approach because we want to be able to make assurances to our merchants as to what is going on with any code that they include, because they're including our frame pay. So we want to be really transparent with them. They are also having to make assurances to their customers on what data they're collecting and how they're processing and what they're doing with it. So, and there are generally a lot of legitimate reasons for collecting fraud-related data or fraud prevention-related data. So it's not necessarily an issue with the data itself, but the transparency there. I think the other is having a simple test environment for 3DS2 is important. Something that doesn't take a lot of resources to spin up, and quite frankly, we were looking for a provider that we could have a good relationship with, because to us, relationship is probably the most important factor. We want to be able to get you on the phone or on Slack to say, hey, what's going on here with this? And to be able to get an answer versus opening up a formal support ticket and waiting 72 hours for the response SLA. And I like responses in minutes, especially with payments. And our clients really appreciate that as well.
Yeah, so as you said, the market varies. We've tried to do some sort of competitor research, and we've seen, the old ones that also offered, the old larger companies that offered an MPI are also in the game for the 3D Secure server, and we are talking large Java applications that are running, and that the documentation is obscure and the home web pages haven't been updated since 2017, and stuff like that. I'm not going to try and oversell 3D Secure.io, but we've developed what we think we'd want, essentially. We're in a eat your own dog food situation, since we're also an acquirer. Our partners, PSPs, use 3D Secure.io to do transactions as well. So.
Yeah. Casper, one more question. I wanted to ask about the exceptions to 3DS2 and secure customer authentication. I've read that there is an exception for one-leg transactions. Can you tell us more about this?
So one-leg transactions. So it's easier to find two-leg transactions. Two-leg transactions are where both the merchant and the cardholder are located in the EU. One-leg transactions is where only one of the sides, either the merchant or the cardholder, is in the EU. And for example, a merchant could be in the US and a cardholder could be in Germany or Sweden, I don't know. And that transaction would be exempt from SCA, from the PSD2 legislation. Right? So that's very relevant for US merchants. Yeah. So if we're talking the other way around with an American cardholder and a German merchant, not all PSPs to which the merchant would integrate actually would likely support exempting one-leg transactions. They might, save the work and just put everyone through SCA. So, and that's essentially it. It could also boil down to liability shift, because they want liability shift on the transactions, and that is something we in Europe, our acquirers are interested in Europe to get liability shift on US cards, because they're foreign, and we often see fraud on US cards. So, yeah.
That's really valuable to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, since we're just about at time, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I hope that we've helped those of you watching better understand 3DS2 and how to best prepare for it. I'd like to thank all of the panelists, Adam, Casper, Irina. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge on this topic. If you're watching this and have any additional questions for Rebilly or any of our panelists today, feel free to drop us a comment below or reach out via our channels. You can reach out at support@rebilly.com, and also give us a follow on LinkedIn if you'd like to stay tuned to any other payment industry panels that we might have coming up for you. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I learned so much today, Casper. Thanks for shining light on this, by the way.
Very welcome.